Next from Springfield, we sit down with State Senator and candidate for State Treasurer Mike Frerichs. Senator Frerichs addresses such issues as why he is running for State Treasurer, whether Illinois should adopt a progressive income tax, and how a State Treasurer can best invest state funds to get a better rate of return for Illinois. This runs about 20 minutes.
State Senator Mike Frerichs, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Terry, happy to be here today.
You're running for State Treasurer, and first of all, let's just ask you a simple question: why give up the Senate seat and try to run for State Treasurer?
Sure. There's nothing wrong with the Senate. I've enjoyed serving there for the last 7 years. I feel we've been able to accomplish some things, make a difference and impact in people's lives. People would come to me and encourage me to look at the Treasurer's office, and I think it's because I had a background in government finance. Before being in the Senate, I was our Champaign County Auditor and a certified public finance officer, and so they encouraged me to look at it. And the more I looked, I saw similar opportunities to help improve the lives of people in the state of Illinois, to help get our state back on the right track. And after much research looking into it, decided this was a place where I feel I can best serve our state.
You know, obviously, anyone who's paid any attention to state government in Illinois knows that we've been in a prolonged fiscal crisis, part of our own doing, part of it being a reflection of the overall U.S. economy that had gone downhill. But on the other hand, as State Treasurer, you know, for those who don't know, I mean, in essence, the primary job of State Treasurer is to invest and make money on the monies that are sitting in the state checking account, in typically short-term instruments. But what do you see as the opportunity through the job? What could you do, I mean, beyond investing the funds like every treasurer would do, that would have any kind of influence on, say, the direction of the state from a fiscal standpoint?
Well, that's a good question. I have a lot of people ask me when I say I'm running for State Treasurer, what job do you have? We have a state that's broke. What would you invest? And I remind them that we're not broke. Our general revenue fund has serious problems, a serious backlog of bills there. But the state has hundreds of state funds out there that have positive fund balances. We need to invest those funds. The State Treasurer also has a seat on the Illinois State Board of Investment, which is in charge of managing 3 state pension funds. And as much as our pension funds have large unfunded liabilities, there are still billions of dollars in those funds that we have to invest to make sure that there's money ready for when people retire. And so I think things you can do is, a lot of these are short-term investments. There's not a lot of play out there. But I think what the Treasurer can do is make sure we're getting a good return in our pension funds, and make sure we're investing in things that also have ancillary benefits for the state of Illinois. I think we can do a better job of investing in our companies here in the state of Illinois, and investing in our people, investing in our roads and infrastructure. I think if we do things like that, I tell them there's no magic bullet. The Treasurer's office itself can't get Illinois going in the right direction. But I think you can be part of a team that helps lead us the right way.
You're a Democrat right now. The governor's Democrat. There's going to be a run for governor. And so let's say whether it's a Democrat, if Governor Quinn is reelected, or if a Republican became the governor, to what extent should the State Treasurer as a fiscal officer have a voice? And if you think that the direction of whatever administration would be in office, do you see the role of Treasurer as being one who would speak out publicly and say, you know, I think you're doing something wrong along fiscal matters, or would you kind of keep more to your own department and let the governor's office run itself?
The Treasurer's office is limited in the amount of statutory responsibility they have in terms of setting a budget. Now, some people have talked and said that we need to make sure we pass balanced budgets. I think if you want to work on budgets, then the place to work on those is in the legislature. Now, that being said, the Treasurer is a fiscal officer. And if you see that the state is going in the wrong direction, you ought to be able to use the bully pulpit of your financial office to talk about that. And so that's something I think I could do. And whomever is the governor, it shouldn't make a difference about the job I am running for. And I look forward to working with whomever, and when I think they're going in the wrong direction, calling them out on that.
Dan Rutherford is the current state treasurer. He's running for governor, so he's leaving the seat. Have you looked at what he's done? Is there anything that you would have done differently, or things that he's done that you would agree with?
Well, I think we've got a big opportunity coming forward with our state's 529 plan, the college savings funds. Their contract is coming up. There's an opportunity for an extension, but I really think we ought to bid this out. And we ought to fight really hard to drive down costs that we're paying towards money managers. Because I think that when parents are taking a portion of their paycheck, you know, whether it be $50, $20 a paycheck to put into their kids' college savings fund. And they're trying to give them better opportunities. So they have an opportunity to go to college, a university, some sort of trade school program. The vast majority of that money should be going towards their kids' education, not towards some money manager in another state.
You know, one of the issues that's come up periodically is whether or not we should combine the offices of state treasurer and comptroller. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the public ought to have a right to know. In the Senate, I voted to allow that constitutional question to go on the ballot. Now, that being said, I also said I would go out there and say there are advantages of having checks and balances. And to explain it to a lot of people, they say, well, can we be more efficient? Well, the city of Dixon decided they want to be more efficient, and they put all their financial responsibilities under one CFO. And she absconded with millions and millions of dollars.
Like $50 million.
50-some $million in a small little town, Dixon, Illinois. She didn't have someone writing the checks with her or someone coming in and auditing her. She was the fiscal response officer. And people can understand this when you go to the movie theater. You go and there's one person there who you buy the ticket from, and then you walk 20 steps and you hand the ticket to someone else to get in. You could make it more efficient by just having one person. But if you just had one person, that person could very easily take your money, not give you a ticket, and put it in their own pocket and let people through. So I think it's good to have a comptroller who also is looking over the treasurer's office, and the treasurer who is a co-signatory on the checks, just to make sure there's no funny business with our money.
This may sound stupid, but I'll say it. I mean, I think the savings they estimated would be somewhere in the area of $12 million if you combine the offices a year, which $12 million is on one hand a lot of money, but relative to the entire state budget, or in the example you gave, if one person could, in a small town of Dixon, manage to skim off $50 million over a period of time, it might be cheap insurance.
Yeah, and I remind people the reason we have a separate comptroller and treasurer with our 1970 Constitution is because we had that problem in the state of Illinois. And so I think we need to be very careful. I've told people that if we can find significant savings, we need to look at them. But then we do need to make sure that there's some sort of control, some sort of check and balance out there to make sure that we're not becoming too efficient, so it's very efficient to steal money.
One of the other items that are going to be discussed this year, and it's, in fact, just as we taped this the other day, some of the Republican members of the legislature were having a press conference warning against this. It's an effort to have a progressive income tax. And for those who don't know, there's either you tax everyone at a same rate, which Illinois does on income. It's we call it a flat tax, or you do what is done at the federal level, where the more you make, the more you pay on a percentage basis. What are your thoughts relative? Some people are saying we should have a progressive income tax, and for the viewers' sake, if that were to come about, first of all, they would have to vote on it. It would have to change the Constitution. The legislature would have to put it on the ballot to be on the ballot in November. So it's not something that you can do, just to be clear.
No.
But just from a philosophical standpoint, or where do you stand on that issue?
Yeah, there are many steps before this would become law. But what I hear some of my Republican colleagues saying this would be bad for the state, that a progressive income tax, or what we call a fair tax, would destroy jobs. They say it's a jobs killer. I'd say we've had a progressive income tax in the United States for 100 years now, just over 100 years. And in that time, we've seen some of the greatest economic growth in the world. And so if a progressive tax really were a jobs killer, then it would have stifled jobs at the federal level. And I also remind them, the very first time we had a progressive income tax in this country was under Abraham Lincoln. To finance the Civil War in 1862, passed a progressive income tax. And so these people who say that proudly they're the party of Lincoln, I would say, look towards Lincoln. He didn't have a strict ideology. He was about keeping this union together and doing in a way that sort of brought people together. And I think that we can have that discussion here as well. We don't need to have a battle of rich versus poor, class warfare. But I think that we can have something that's fair. For those who have been given more, they can pay a little bit more. And we're not necessarily talking about huge number of different levels out there or a huge disparity. But I think that this is something the voters ought to have a say in next fall.
I spoke earlier this saying, I don't know, is your term up this year in the Senate if you were not to be elected? Would
No.
you remain in the Senate?
I would remain in the Senate, yes.
The current flat tax, the income tax, which is a flat rate at this point, is at 5%. It was raised from 3.75%. That increase is supposed to come off not in its entirety, but mostly revert back to the level nearer to what it had been. There's a lot of people think that that would be disastrous economically because it brought in approximately $7 billion. So first of all, just relative to that, if you are still a member of the legislature when that comes to a vote, do you know, what are your thoughts on keeping that, or should it revert back?
Yeah, we've got a long way to go. And I think what the legislature needs to do in this upcoming year is live within our means and pass a reasonably balanced budget. Now, that's going to mean cutting back in some areas, and some of those cuts are going to hurt. But the public ought to know as we're going into this upcoming election, I think this will be the big issue in the governor's race. And that both sides ought to honestly say what they would cut in order to balance the budget, or how much revenue they're going to need to raise in order to keep those priorities intact. And I think that if both candidates coming out of the primary are honest about this and they lay this out in front of the public, I think the public will decide, and then that's what the General Assembly will probably do. They'll say the will of the people have spoken, they liked candidate X's approach, and let's move forward with that.
Do you have any personal thoughts as far as keeping it on or not?
Well, I think what we ought to do, as you saw in California, what they did first is they said, Governor Brown showed what the cuts would be without the revenue. And when the public saw the cuts towards higher education, K through 12, public safety, infrastructure spending, the public said, we don't want to see those kind of cuts. Those kind of cuts would pull our state backwards. And so we should start with that and let the public have some say out there. I think that's the way democracy should work.
You know, on your website, you have you discuss B minus. Would that be the phrase? Corporations. I'm not familiar with that term.
So benefit corporations are something that I help pass into law. It's allowing a different kind of corporation out there. Right now, a corporation has a responsibility to its shareholders, to their board of directors, to increase share price. And so sometimes you see corporations doing things that aren't necessarily good for the environment, aren't necessarily good for their communities, because they think that it doesn't have an immediate impact on the value of their shares, and they're worried about shareholder lawsuits. These sort of B Corps would allow them to have other purposes. That wouldn't require any corporation to do this, and that's why we saw a lot of corporate support for this. As I said, some of them have an ethos that they want to take steps that improve their environment, that help their community, and they want to be immune from those lawsuits out there. Any corporation that wants to do that now will have that ability. If they don't want to, they can continue just as they're currently incorporated.
And if they did do that, it would, alleviate them? Would it have any tax implications? Or
No, this doesn't change their tax implications. This is something that, it's one of those rare bills that gets brought to you that people on the left and the right both like. The people on the left like it because it allows the opportunity for corporations to act in a more environmentally responsive manner. And I had people on the far right said, I like flexibility and choice in how we incorporate. And so I think we had strong sort of bipartisan support of this issue.
On the area, we talked earlier just briefly about the pension. Everyone's heard how we were the most underfunded. One of the issues that relates to underfunding is how much are you earning on your investments, and we kind of briefly touched on that. Have you looked at, I sometimes wonder if in the state's quest to be conservative with their investments, they're not overly conservative and are shortchanging the taxpayers. Not that you want to take wild, crazy risks, but sometimes, as an example, personally, I would say anyone who would tie up money right now in a CD at these incredibly low rates would be making a bad investment when there's higher rates at still reasonable risk. Have you looked at any of that? And as state treasurer, what are your thoughts as far as saying, let's allow the state's funds to be invested in a little bit more risky
Robust.
manner, but not crazy risk, but so that you earn more of a rate of return that would be closer to at least what the overall market would be earning?
Yeah, you don't want to say we want to put things into risky funds.
Right.
No one wants to do that. No one wants to have a scandal like that in Ohio where their treasurer was allowed to invest in gold coins and memorabilia. That clearly would be a bad investment for the state of Illinois. Yeah, the other end of the spectrum, the most stable risk-averse strategy is put all your cash in a safe and guard it, and it's never going to go away. But you'll make no money off of it, and you're actually losing money in the long run.
Right.
And so the job of the treasurer and other finance professionals that we work with are to make sure that we get the best rate of return possible at the lowest amount of risk, and it's a balance out there. I think we've seen that a few years ago, the General Assembly allowed the state to be investing funds in Illinois-based venture capital funds with the idea that they would invest in Illinois companies. So not only does the state get a return on investment in terms of money coming into state government, but we're also putting people to work out there. We're creating companies, or growing companies and creating new ones out there, and those people have income that comes back to the state in terms of taxes paid on their salaries. Those are the kinds of things that can be a little bit risky, but that I think have good payoff. And it works so well, we increase the amount of investment from 1% to 3%. Our current treasurer has decided he doesn't want to take advantage of that. I think there's a little more room there for something that says it's not really a risk if we're investing in our state, if we're investing in our people.
I know I did a story some years ago when Judy Barta-Pinka was in her first term as treasurer, nearing her first term. It was a different economy then, but the viewers might be surprised to hear that she earned $1 billion in interest during that first 4-year period. So the amount of money that a treasurer can earn on the state of Illinois funds is substantial. And when you're investing on an overnight basis, a couple of $1 billion, even one day's interest can be substantial. When you would look to invest, who would make those decisions? Now, you said you would put it out for a bid. Would you just pick the lowest bid? To what extent would you look to say, I'm going to look at your track record, and would that be under the umbrella of one company? Or would you say, given the billions of dollars we have, the overall state budget is somewhere in the neighborhood of $62 billion. We often hear the general revenue funds, which are, what are they now, about 35 billion or so, 34 billion, somewhere in that area. But the overall is 62 billion. Would you put that all under one management, or say I'm going to bid it out in units of you get to manage $10 billion or wherever you draw the line? How would you do that?
I think that old phrase that you don't put all your eggs in one basket is a good bit to start off of here. You're not going to put it all into one company's hands. Diversity is a good thing in your investment portfolio, and it's a good thing to have a diverse set of opinions out there as well. So I think if you wanted to really drive down costs the most, you offer it all to the highest bidder. They're probably going to compete a little more. If you get a lot of different people involved, if you put out for lots of different companies, you get so much that people would say, I really need a higher return to justify this small little sliver you're giving me. The thing we'll do is bring together financial professionals to try and find that healthy balance. That you have diversity of opinions, diversities in your investments out there, but still you're not paying excessive fees to money managers in the state of Illinois.
Before we end, let's hear a little bit more about Mike Frerichs. So you've been in the legislature now for how long?
I'm in my 3rd term right now. I'll be starting my 8th year.
And I'm not sure your district number right off the top of my head, but you're around the area of Urbana, and how many counties would you incorporate in that district?
The 52nd district, it is parts of 2 counties, Champaign and Vermilion counties.
So you probably get some good tickets to the U of I games, I would guess. But seriously, as you've now been running and leaving that area where any legislator tends to focus on their area and represent it, have you learned anything that surprised you in the quest for the state treasurer's office so far, where you've gone around the state and met with other people? What kind of things have jumped out, or interesting experiences have you had?
I've had lots of interesting experiences, but I would say I'm biased to my own district. I really like it because I think it's a nice little microcosm of the state of Illinois. I have parts of Champaign and Urbana that if you looked at their vote totals, they'd be very similar to Hyde Park or Oak Park or Evanston. And I have rural parts of my district that if you looked at their vote totals, they'd be very similar to Effingham or Western Illinois. It's a nice little microcosm. It breaks out as fairly ethnically diverse, and you get a wide range of opinions associated with that university. And the university brings in a lot of people who are very liberal. It brings people who are very strongly conservative. And if you have to work with those people every day to get legislation done and to earn their support, I think that's good training for working people around the rest of the state. But I'd say it is a beautiful, big state. As much as I like my area, I think we get down to southern Illinois, they have some beautiful outdoors down there that we don't necessarily have in my backyard. I think that the university brings in an awful lot of interesting talent and diversity, but nowhere near as much as the largest city in our state, in Chicago. And I just think this is a wonderful state to live in, it's a wonderful state to represent, and I hope someday to represent them as a state treasurer.
And just as we close out, we often hear this intellectual gamesmanship, if you would, or argumentation between upstate and downstate on the Republican side. Whomever the nominee is going to be more from the Chicagoland area. You're downstate. Does that matter?
I think it matters to some people, but it shouldn't matter in the quality of job you do. You should be picking someone who is going to do the job, brings competency and experience and financial and government finance to the office. But I think for a party that has continually said around my area that the Democrats only care about Chicago, they don't care about downstate, if you look at our ticket coming out of there, you'll have Mike Frerichs from Champaign County, Sheila Simon from Jackson County, Dick Durbin from Sangamon County. Nearly half of the statewide ticket comes from downstate, because I think that we as Democrats believe in diversity. And that means gender diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, also geographic diversity. When you look at our ticket on a map, we represent all corners of this state, and I think that is a value as well. I was just over in the state capitol and talking to some people there about what background you need to serve in the legislature. And I said, our legislature is stronger because we have people from very different backgrounds. If they all came from the same area, they wouldn't have the diversity of opinions out there. I think our ticket is stronger because we have a nice, diverse ticket.
All right. State Senator Mike Frerichs, candidate for treasurer, we thank you for joining us.
Terry, it's a pleasure. Happy to come back anytime.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.